If we could all turn off our cameras, I think that will help with our bandwidth. But let's go ahead and get started then. And I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to just go into our little presentation and talk about where we are with this. Okay, so we did our welcome, and I just wanted to talk about our agenda. We wanted to take a moment and just step back and kind of focus our direction on the bigger picture. So we'll take a few moments to do that with everybody. We'll give you some updates on a meeting we had Monday this week with most of our ranchers in the county. It was very informative. And then I wanted to, we'll jump into the comments that you all have had a chance to make on the ordinance, and then we'll talk about future meetings. So with that, we could just jump in. I just wanted to, kind of reiterate why the county staff has begun this initiative, and it's directly out of our comprehensive plan. And, there's an implementation plan in that document, and it very simply states that one of our charges is to develop a utility scale energy ordinance to give developers more clear direction on the appropriate siting of utility scale projects. And what we did then, we focused specifically on the renewable aspect of that, because those are the projects that are coming in through our permitting system, so our permitting channels. So we felt that was the appropriate focus. Utility scale facilities are allowed by our zoning ordinance, but this was our focus from county staff. So with that, we launched this initiative, and then of course the virus hit. So we continued on with drafting the ordinance, and then have spent time working through our technical review. And now we're in this stage working with our community reviewers. So this is one continuous public input process. And again, we just want to thank everybody for your continued support, because this is very exciting that you're all joining us and are so willing to commit your time to making sure that this ends up being something the county can, really be happy with, and it will be functional for everybody. So with that, though, we wanted to get my computer to work. Hang on. There we go. We want to just step back and make sure that we're on the right track. So this is a moment for you all to express to us, what is your interest in the renewable energy ordinance? From your perspective, from wherever you sit, what are your priorities? What are your concerns? What are the positive aspects of this? And then, again, we just want to know that we're on the right track with the process that you've seen so far, but also, with the draft that we're working on. So there's really no format to this. If we could just, speak one at a time, if you all wanted to respond to really, let's just start with the first question. What is your interest in being involved with this process?
Well, Melissa, this is Bill Auberly. I'm ready to go.
Great, thank you, Bill.
Sort of at the large scale, these projects are our energy future. I think many of us accept the fact that we have to quit burning things to produce our electricity, and also ultimately to power our vehicles and replace fossil fuels in general. So these projects are really important for many, many reasons. Having said that, we know from many renewable energy projects across the country, including the two big projects, actually three if you count Dry Lake and Navajo County as phase 1 and phase 2 in Perrin Ranch. We know that the challenges are where and how these projects are placed on the land, because they are massive in terms of their scale, and because we have many values associated with not just renewable energy development, but the use of our landscape in northern Arizona, it makes sense to examine all of these projects as they necessarily we will do in terms of the merits of each individual project. I think it's useful to have a county ordinance that provides some general guidance on each individual project, but in the end, what we're going to be doing is looking at each project in considerable detail. And the issues will be a bit different, of course, depending upon where it is and whether it's wind or solar. I really have little interest in getting into biomass. I just don't think that's something that we're going to be wrestling with in the immediate future, but it's possible. But in terms of wind and solar, there are real issues as to where and how these are placed on the land. And I want to see them go forward, but I want to see them go forward in a responsible way. And having wrestled with this industry in many ways, for a long, long time, 20 plus years, certainly, then it's important to our county, it's important to our energy future, it's important to our economic future, but we need to do it right.
Thank you, Bill. Do you have any comments on, are we on the right track with this process?
Yeah, I do think we are on the right track. I think that, as I said, and I said this at the beginning of our technical committee discussions, that ultimately we're going to be looking at individual projects based upon their own merits. But so I think having a countywide guidance can be useful for developers for these projects. But in the end, whatever those guidance say, the project is going to move forward or not based upon its how it addresses the many characteristics that the public is concerned about.
Thanks, Bill. Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll jump in, Melissa.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, dear. I'm the devil's advocate on the group because as I was 10 years ago when we did Perrin Ranch, and my biggest concern and my real reason for being on it is to make sure that we're looking at it from every aspect possible and that we're not doing more damage by pursuing these projects than we would be if we took another track. I'm very much into site-based energy production because we can't continue to eat, despite whatever you would like to think, we can't continue to dig up and disturb and put more and more energy plants. We could put energy plants up till the day the cows come home, and we won't generate all the energy that everybody wants because of the fact that we have limited resources. And so my interest is just to make sure that somebody's looking at the other side of the question.
Thanks, Linda. Anybody else like to jump in?
Melissa, can I say something? This is Karin.
Absolutely.
My interest in the ordinance, I mentioned earlier that I have a great deal of experience in this area. So from a technical and professional perspective, that's my interest. But personally, it's becoming clearer every day that we need to decarbonize every aspect of our electricity and other energy uses as quickly as possible. And I'm really excited that the county is trying to figure out how it plays a role in that. I think that electricity generation is actually relatively straightforward in comparison to the other challenges that we're going to face as societies in decarbonizing energy use. And I understand the fact that our decision makers need to balance a lot of competing interests. So my interest is in helping to balance those interests and going to get technical information where it's useful. I think we're on the right track. I'm not sure that the doc you sent out actually shows the edits, so I'm excited to see what you guys have come up with. And I'm delighted that you have so many different experts and stakeholders in the process. Thank you.
Thanks, Karin. Floor is open.
This is Scott Best.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I would just like to be a Pollyanna. I think we have an amazing group of people here, really. We have more people here than we would have if we were in a room somewhere. So, and we have a really strong county comprehensive plan with a great set of positive values. And I think by balancing those positive values, we will come out with a really good solution, or we have the potential to. I think we can do it all and have all the values represented and come out with a really good plan. Thanks everybody for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Melissa?
Yes, hi, John.
I'll add a couple of comments on that, just a follow up to what Commissioner Best has just said. My interest in this is simply from the good planning point of view. Priorities, one, to provide an ordinance that is workable and provides flexibility, especially considering the position that the Planning and Zoning Commission is in, and also as a follow-on, the Board of Supervisors. I think we're well on the track to that. As far as my concerns, really at this point, extremely minor. There aren't any, the group as a whole has contributed immensely to what we have right now. And that's one of the positives as well. Are we on the right track? Absolutely. Having participated in the last revision of the comprehensive plan, I was a little dismayed to find that the utility scale energy part of it was only an appendix. I couldn't convince people to make it an integral part of the plan. But we've progressed well beyond that, and this is where we're at right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I think there was somebody else wanting to speak.
Yeah, this is Jay Smith. Well, I understand what Bill's saying about biomass energy, but I'm kind of on the other side that I really hope we have to deal with biomass energy because of looking at what the results would be if we cannot move forward with fry and thinning across millions of acres that are overstocked timber, trees that, you know, if they burn like what California is doing, the amount of carbon release, just adding that idea that, you know, there are fringe benefits to biomass energy, even though the cost is higher, that really we need to just keep on the forefront and looking at as we develop this so that we don't discourage biomass energy.
Thanks, Jay. Appreciate your contributions here.
So this is Ruben with State Land.
Hi, Ruben. Go ahead, Ruben, and then we'll get to.
So I'd like to just add a couple comments. So the interest from the land department is certainly, you know, to create a partnership with the county and our lessees and the developers that, you know, provides for, you know, good management of trust land and aligns our interests when it comes to these areas and to these projects. So, you know, as far as priorities, you know, our priorities are driven by our developers and our lessees. Our concerns, I don't really have many concerns at this point in time. We'll see as we proceed forward, but I'm really excited that the county is taking the initiative to do a comprehensive plan on energy. You know, we've come a long way here at the land department in developing a wind program 10 years ago on the Dry Lake project. So I'm excited to see all the new activity this upcoming years. And I think it's a really, you know, positive partnership that we can develop in this process. So I think you're on the right track. So thank you again, Melissa, for the invitation, and we'll be excited to, you know, help and develop the outcome.
Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. There was somebody else.
Melissa, this is Diana. Can I say something?
Hi, Diana. Absolutely.
I am supposed to be helping everyone understand the impacts to ranching in Coconino County. And I think the consensus is we are very, very concerned about an ordinance because it's law and it's not moves too slow and it's not flexible, and all of this stuff we might be interested in, but it's going to have huge effects to our businesses, our value, our private land rights. I mean, I'm just telling you, we're looking at this like, oh my God, what have we unleashed? For a little background, this ranch that I am an owner of, we have been through this process. We had a large plant sited. Things changed economically and politically, and it never came to fruition. And we are immensely glad it didn't, for the disruption to the land, to the animals, both wild and domestic, and everything. I realize we got to have electricity and all that, but I think we're far away from understanding the quantity that's required, and land and solar and wind just can't be anything more than a drop in the bucket. So, however, I will stick with this because it does affect, it's going to can hugely affect our private land values. And as to the state land, they have a huge role to play in all these ranches as well because of the checkerboard nature. So I'm a little fearful. I'm going to continue to learn and try to contribute where I can, but I'm like a frog in a hailstorm, having been through this all and looked at it all, and I don't agree with totally the premises, and I would like to keep it as broad as possible. I don't want to rule out more biomass. I don't want to rule out what's the other thing we talked about this morning? Geothermal. I don't want to rule out nuclear. I think we need to be as open as possible. This ordinance is written. We do not know what's going to be in 20 years. So I just would like to stay open and learning and not get caught into some dogma. And I'm trying hard not to be a rancher with its dogma. But the other day at the meeting, I heard some concerns that I had not even thought of. So that's why I'm here, and I'm always eager to hear questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. So, and chime in when we get to the next part of our meeting today, because I was trying to recap. Well, you'll see. I was recapping our meeting from Monday. Is there anybody else?
Okay.
Hey, Melissa. This is Terrence Unrein with S-Power.
Hi, Terrence.
I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible in this process, and I hope that at least some folks could recognize that our 477 megawatt wind farm has been approved in Coconino County, Navajo County, the Arizona Corporation Commission, Rubin, and the Arizona State Land Department. I do not have any open discretionary permit applications with Coconino County at this time, nor do I anticipate submitting any applications in the immediate foreseeable future. So I'm really trying to come in here unbiased, represent industry, and what I want to see happen is an ordinance that may dissuade the wrong solar and wind farms from Coconino County and the wrong developers, but an ordinance that does not dissuade investment in renewable energy from the right developers and the right sites. S-Power has provided pretty extensive comments to the ordinance, to the first draft of the ordinance that was provided for our review. There are areas in there that I think could scare people like us, considering investing in a solar or wind farm in Coconino County. So that's where we're coming from, trying to be as unbiased as possible and end up with something that lets the right projects come in and gives your elected officials and your staff enough tools in their tool belt to not let the right projects come in.
Thank you. Thanks, Terrence. Anybody else? And we can always come back to this. This is, certainly a conversation that's open. We want to be really transparent about where everybody's coming from. So if we need to come back to this, we certainly will. But with that, should we move on? Can we move on to the next agenda item? Forward. Okay, so as I mentioned, we had a very informative meeting earlier this week organized by Supervisor Babbitt. And we had, and Diana and Billy, if you're on the line, just correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, we had most of our ranchers, our large ranchers, in the county at that meeting.
That's correct. Yep.
Is that right?
Yep, that is correct.
Okay, great. And that was Billy, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I gleaned several kind of big topics from that meeting, and just wanted to bring them back to you all, because these are the properties where the majority of these facilities will be sited. So we're trying to understand, the purpose of that meeting was to listen to Diana and Billy and the other ranchers, what their perspective is on this ordinance, but not just on the ordinance, but on the potential in general for these large scale facilities. So, what came out of that is, we need to understand and look at the ordinance from that perspective. There's a handful of landowners and ranchers who will ultimately be the looking at these up close and personal. So, that was really important for us to hear their perspective. One of the things that I heard was needed is that the ordinance, but not just the ordinance, but ranches in general, they need to be more flexible. They need flexibility, diversity, and options, and more opportunities in order to stay functioning. Because there are challenges right now, and the ranchers can certainly speak to those challenges. I'm sure it's not a mystery with the climate changing, and there's not as much precipitation. The landscape is drying out, so they're looking to ways at different ways to stay functioning and viable. It was a really clear message that our comprehensive plan is actually somewhat of a mirror as to what conservation values the ranchers are doing on their own to conserve their land and protect the integrity of the landscape. So they're already doing many different elements that our comprehensive plan puts forward in terms of values. Protecting the conservation values are very strongly woven throughout our entire plan, and the ranchers are already ahead of the game. They're doing that without any kind of prodding from the county. So one of the other important themes that came out, and as I already alluded to, is that these ranchers are wanting to keep these large land holdings intact and viable. Because if that doesn't happen, and this has happened in other cases, what could be the next step is that they become split into the 40s. I mean, if just to explain what that means is, those are 40-acre parcels, and those can be divided up. Those pieces can be sold off without county approval, because those are allowed by state law. So that's a real possibility, although we didn't hear anyone wanting to go there. So that's something that we're thinking about and trying to not get into a place where that has to happen. A couple other comments we heard, what is wind actually worth? Because it was interesting to hear a perspective from the Macaulays about, when Perrin Wind Farm was constructed, it was a lot of work. It was a lot of construction on the land. Their ranch operations were somewhat interrupted. The new roads and other impacts were something that, I guess, as a landowner who's looked at an intact functioning landscape for a lot of years, it's a lot of new impacts on the landscape. But at the same time, it has brought them financial relief. So it was a real interesting question to hear, what is wind actually worth? And Diana and Billy, you can certainly chime in. This is the last slide on this, but and then Diana has already mentioned, one of the main concerns is to make sure that private property is protected, and to make sure that this ordinance does not take away from their private property interests. And at the same time, wanting the county and others to recognize that ranches are providing a lot of our open space, and that's a strong value in the comprehensive plan. So, you know, that's important to recognize that these are an integral part of our landscape. It's part of the character of the county. And that's something that, you know, came through loud and clear. There was some interesting discussion about other issues that we're not dealing with in this effort, because, you know, but it was interesting to hear that the ranchers are seeing a lot of impacts and even more impacts since March, April this year. You know, when as we know, the forest, all of the land is very heavily used right now by people trying to, or just getting outside and learning about recreation again. Hunters and vehicles, they all have a pretty big impact on the ranches. So that's nothing we can do with. We're going to stay focused on our current effort, but it was interesting to hear about that. And I'll just finish with this one last slide. So they did have some comments on the ordinance, and I know there are more comments that will be on the way. Actually, you know what? I'll back up. Let me stop there. Was there anything else that I missed or need a clarification, Billy or Diana, on the perspective that we heard from you?
No, that's terrific. Thank you.
You're welcome.
No, you did a good job.
Thanks. So, yeah, a couple of thoughts on the ordinance, and then we'll jump into looking at the bigger comments that we received from the larger group. You know, one of the concerns that came through loud and clear is that as it's currently written, you know, we have requirements in there to consider impacts to our scenic resources and view sheds. So as we know, because of the size and scale of these and the location of the ranches, many of these will end up being visible no matter what we do from a lot of scenic resources and from scenic corridors. So that came through loud and clear as something to really look at the ordinance and understand, you know, how that requirement is analyzed by the county. There is a concern, a very clear concern, that this type of ordinance may devalue property. And then just another, you know, and it was an interesting perspective that our public process may and sometimes does not actually reflect the large landowner perspective. So, you know, these were just kind of some big themes that came out of Monday's meeting that I heard. But again, Billy and Diana, did I miss anything with that?
No, perfect.
No.
Okay.
Melissa, this is
Hi.
Thad.
Hi.
I was wondering, could you elaborate a little bit on how the ordinance could devalue the property? That's interesting. I never thought about that before.
Well, I'm going to let, you know, Billy or Diana chime in here, because that's something that as a planner, I'll give you my planner's perspective on that, because, you know, from a planning perspective, the idea with this ordinance is actually to enable and provide developers with consistency. And so when a project comes in the door, they know what's required. The idea is ideally there'd be very few unknowns. There wouldn't be surprises. So from a planning perspective, an ordinance like this is really intended to make these projects much more easily permitted and more consistency across the board. So, but that's my role as a planner, and that's my view on an ordinance, but there are obviously many other views. So I'm going to let Billy and Diana chime in on that one, if you care to.
Billy, go ahead.
Well, I think what you just said, Melissa, was just right. But along with that, really, you know, these few landowners in Coconino County that have any opportunity to do anything at a utility scale, you know, if they're not allowed to do, if opportunities are taken away from them, you know, then it kind of diminishes their ability to diversify and do anything other than sell as whether it's 40-acre parcels or some other development. And with the state land, interestingly, you know, whatever happens on state land then has a direct impact on the private land. What happens on the private land impacts the state land. So all these things kind of have a ripple effect. It's mostly with limiting the opportunities to diversify and to keep the landscapes intact.
Well, thanks for that clarification. And it's interesting because something that
Thank you.
Terrence, you're welcome. Something that Terrence mentioned is, You know, and I do appreciate the perspective of making sure that this ordinance attracts the right kind of, you know, renewable energy projects to the county. And I think these go hand in hand because, you know, if the ordinance is written so that it does bring in the developers that will consider the landscape and that will protect our different values, then that is something that will be a win-win for everybody.
Les, I have a question that involves ranchers.
And that's SOT, right?
Yeah, this is SOT. Big picture, one of the big positive values, one of the pair of positive values that seem to conflict are view sheds and wind farms, 800-foot towers. That on the last one that came through planning and zoning, the Chevron project, the towers were up to 755 feet, I think. So I've been just thinking, I talked to Bill Arberly a couple of times, and I kind of like rancher's perspective as I look at Chevron, because that's the best map I have. That's the last one that came through, and I still have the map. You get 60 square miles of land with a whole lot of spaghetti on it, a lot of roads, a lot of pads, a lot of transmission lines as you spread out over that land. I compared Chevron to a project in California with roughly the same production. Topaz is the name of the project in California. So Chevron was 60 square miles of towers plus whatever the view shed beyond that, how far you could see the 800-foot towers. And Topaz was 9 square miles of a solar array. So the question is, how does that affect ranchers? The 9 square miles obviously is a total loss, but then all the roads and the pads are also disruptive of the cattle operation. Production would be more or less the same, and you could fold the 9 square miles into even if it were just out on flat land, it would not affect the view shed nearly as much as the 60 miles of towers. And of course, there's also the issue of who's going to step forward and say that I would rather pay for wind or solar depending on how the money works out. According to Bill Arberly, he's saying that solar is now possibly more viable than wind. But from the rancher's perspective, how does that impact on your real estate compare? Thanks.
So Sat, I'm not sure how it compares with the value, the real estate value. You know, I mean, you know, I mean, for Babbitt's, you know, I mean, view shed is a value, and to all of us, you know, if you live in Northern Arizona, I don't know, it may be the top value that everybody agrees on as being, you know, the most significant for why they live in Northern Arizona. And along with that, the view shed issues, you know, over the years, as I've been following, they go from somebody building a house in your backyard to, I remember on the county comprehensive plan, when we first did it, I think they used the word skylining. Somebody used the word skylining as far as somebody building a house like up on top of a ridge and skylining the ridge line and all this. The thoughts all through the last 2 county comprehensive plans have almost always been circling the issue of view shed. And, you know, so for Babbitt's, for starters, on the wind turbines, you know, speaking personally, but I think I can tell you that we've had a lot of visits at Babbitt's about it. You know, there is absolutely something very inspiring to most of us when we see these wind turbines against that beautiful blue sky generating, you know, clean energy that suggests that we're doing our part for the next generation to do the right things that we can do. So with that being said, there's that inside of all of us. And along with that, then it's like, well, okay, But same time, there's the other side of the coin. Says, you know, you might have a different look about your country. And so for Babbitt's, the way that's moved along, and appreciate the time here, is that a number of years ago, it was in the 90s, Babbitt's was at a place where we had to make a decision. And that decision was, we had several offers to have the ranches purchased for 40-acre development. And it was a large sum of money. And at that time, Babbitt's was in a transition between generations. And it was a time where it took a lot of elbow grease to have those conversations and sift through that. They unanimously decided not to sell Babbitt ranches for 40-acre development. But with that was going to come a commitment to the other values that the ranches had, and that we would diversify and to explore those opportunities and to do our best to hold it all intact and really embrace all of the values that were not just quantifiable, but also the quality values and the values that didn't necessarily have a price on them. And so we did that. And as most of you know, Babbitt Ranches has either the 6th or 7th largest conservation easement in the United States on the cataract that was donated. We've got 16 miles of riparian being restored on the Little Colorado River. We released the #1 endangered mammal species, the black-footed ferret, on Babbitt Ranches, one of the few in the country to do so. We've participated in conservation activities that are extraordinary, and we've learned a lot, and it has really demonstrated to the owners exactly what they expected from us when they said, do not turn these into 40-acre parcels. And so with all of that, we have a proposal at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service currently that absolutely takes our conservation efforts to a level that I never even dreamed of. And I'm just so excited for not just Babbitt's, but for the state land, for other state and federal agencies, for the county, and for a lot of others. And with that being said, you have to diversify, because we don't get paid to do those things. That's our commitment to the land. It is a value that we hold dearly. After 135 years of managing these lands, it is something that we're very proud and excited to give to the next generation, and quite frankly, to several generations after them. And these decisions we're making. So when it came down to supporting the renewable energy side, in particular the wind, we had to really make a choice about, from a business side, what are we going to do in order to maintain all of this other stuff we do? And the trade-off is, if you shed issue for 30 years or whatever the term period may be, when we talked about that, it was like, had we put a wind farm on Babbitt Ranches when I first started working here, we would be taking those down and restoring the land back to just the way it is today. And then that generation would have the choice of what to do. So it is a temporary use of the land, even if it seems like 30 years or however many years it ends up being is a long time, it isn't. And so we're really just bridging a gap for our owners to maintain their conservation values, to maintain the integrity of that landscape, to embrace some economic diversity, to account for not just ourselves, but for the county. This is a substantial benefit to the county to be able to do some of their things they would like to do associated with the county comprehensive plan that they can't afford. It allows for us to produce renewable energy, hand off to the next generation something extraordinary for those kids that says, you know what, that generation did care about what we've got going. And so anyway, that's how we are looking at this full ordinance and the opportunity for renewable energy. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Billy.
Melissa?
Hi, Diana.
Give me 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Billy hit all sorts of nail on the head, but I have to say, Billy, I wish my grandparents had got here 17 years earlier than they did, because we've only been here 117 years. So I understand that long term. Look, we live, not all of Babbitt's shareholders have the luxury of living on their land. My family, we live on it. I mean, we literally live on it. And so any impact to the land is an assault on our front yard, if you know what I mean. And as we looked at this project, we thought long and hard about that. And like Macaulay mentioned, that the family decides, what does this really mean to us? We said, okay, we will tolerate this disturbance. We don't want it, but we'll tolerate it when we signed those agreements. After everything closed down and they did not exercise the option and the plan never went forward, we all took a deep breath and said, wow, that was perhaps a short-sighted decision. The impact, the disruption to the life of the land is huge. So we chose to say, okay, how else can we do just what Billy said? How can we survive financially and not have to cut off two fingers to save the right hand? And we have done some pretty amazing things. We're not nearly as dramatic as Billy is, but I will say to you that our commitment to conservation is bigger than it ever was, because it's now, the public thinks it's all wonderful. We had to do it to survive, and we will continue to do it. But there's a next generation of conservation, regenerative ranching that we're not really talking about. And if we can get past all this wind stuff and get them all down and buried in 30 years, we'll be at a whole different place, because there's new learnings coming all the time about the values of open space. So anyway, I value what you said, Billy, but I have to tell you, it's right here in our backyard, and we just didn't want that disruption, but we were willing to say, okay, we'll do this, but we're so glad we didn't. So I'm just thankful that y'all will listen to us crazy people that live on the planet and have to run a business. It ain't easy.
Thanks, Diana. And just on that note, then, I wanted to mention, that ultimately what the ranchers choose to do on their land is their decision. This ordinance, if in the future there was an interest in welcoming a solar array or a wind farm to your land, then this ordinance would help to guide the siting and the standards for that. And that's what we're really striving to do here, is take the comprehensive plan values, use those to basically formulate this ordinance. And it's not easy. The devil is in the details, but that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So I'm going to go ahead and move on. And I think at some point, though, we may need to come back to the topic that Sop brought up in terms of, solar versus wind. But I think at this point, this ordinance does need to address both of those types of facilities as well as biomass. Was there somebody else who had a comment?
Melissa, I would like to thank Billy and Diana for sharing their perspective from the large rancher side. I've had the experience of being president of a POA with mixed lots of 10 acres and then 40 acres. And the wind farms coming in and putting up the towers and getting the permits. And I think that from that experience, I took away a couple of things that perhaps they have thought of and but haven't mentioned. One of them was the fact that the towers give you the wind speed and they tell you what you can put up. But when the companies come in, they don't always tell you the little details, such as the fact that if you're not at sea level, your wind farm produces less power. And the fact that they have tons and tons and tons, thousands of tons of water that are being tied up in concrete. And a lot of times people don't stop and think about the fact that once you put water into concrete, it's gone. You cannot get it back in the water cycle. And as a 60s environmentalist who taught fourth grade, we did a water cycle unit. And every time I would say to the kids, explain to me what this means when I say this to you. We are using the same water as the dinosaurs. And fourth graders really thought that was pretty cool. But what it means is that the amount of water we've got on Earth is X amount. That's it, folks. When it is gone, we're gone, because we can live without the electric, but we cannot live without water and air. And that's why I'm against a lot of these large-scale projects, is because of the tremendous amount of resources that are used in producing that energy. And it's fine to say for the power companies to say, oh, we can generate more power. You can't when the bottle goes dry. And we're not considering that factor. What are we going to actually end up passing down to children and grandchildren? Are we going to pass down a country and a world that has no water and no resources left for them? I think that's one of the things that we have to address. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. And you did make some comments about that in the ordinance, so we will certainly dive into that in some detail. So, and I'm watching the clock. It's 10 o'clock, or almost 10 o'clock, and we had scheduled an hour and a half. What I wanted to do was talk about the comments that we have from you, and also then we'll leave the PowerPoint and we can start looking at the actual edits that that we started making based on your comments. So I had sent out a summary of the comments. I don't know that we need to go through those line by line. I think what I would like to do is go into the actual ordinance and look at that. And so does anyone have any questions or comments at that point before I close the presentation? Okay, great. Hang on a second. Okay, and let me just grab my notes here. So if you all have had a chance to look through the comments, and by the way, I just want to again thank everybody for taking the time and really looking thoroughly at this. We're in a drafting process. It's going to continue to change. So, we will have more meetings after this, I'm sure. But there are several themes, and what I tried to do was make these edits based on some of the themes that were brought up out of your comments. And I will send this edited draft to you after this meeting today. So one of the things that I did hear from several sources is that concentrating solar thermal, and we don't need to get into a lot of detail, that may not be appropriate in Coconino County. And Karin and the other technical experts, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that technology may not be ready to really bring to the county, but it also, because it does use a fair amount of water, that might be something to think about not enabling in the county. It's also, I think everybody's heard with the mirrors that uses, it is really harmful to birds. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, Melissa, this is Sat. I think solar biomass does use water as well. We have a desperate need for biomass to make fry work.
Mm-hmm.
If we're going to sacrifice water, it ought to be for biomass.
Thanks. Okay. I'm going to scroll on down. So there was a question about adding geothermal to this ordinance. And my understanding is that the county is not in a great position to bring or to utilize geothermal energy at this point. Maybe in the future. These ordinances are always subject to modification. It's almost a living document, and it will be amended as is needed. So if in the future geothermal does become more viable, then that can be brought into this effort. But, to stay focused and really give the time needed for the projects that are coming in, the solar and the wind and possibly biomass, that's why we chose to narrow this to those specific types of facilities.
Hey, Melissa.
Hi, is that Janet?
It is Janet. Just a quick question. we owe you some comments, but one thought right there is, what about energy storage? Does that need to be called out? Is that something that's been thought about?
We have talked about that. And so could you just explain a little bit more? Are you thinking specifically batteries and large battery facilities?
You know, I don't know that I'm ready. I don't know that I'm capable to talk about that right at the moment. I just know that that's one of the comments that's going to come back is consider adding energy storage to the definition of utility scale. It could be in conjunction with one of these projects. Maybe it's standalone.
Yeah, and we would want to be technology agnostic on that, I'm assuming. Batteries are definitely a big part of that now, but they may not be what we're using in the future. There's a lot of other options there.
Okay, we'll look at that. And I do think that storage is actually included in the definition of these facilities, but it might need to be fleshed out a little bit further. Okay, thank you. Some of these edits are just edits that I didn't line out, but these are comments that were made, and I just went ahead and included those edits in the document. So without going line by line, you all have the comments. I will send you this, and then you can look at how your comments were addressed. But again, I'm trying to stick to some of the major themes. This is a theme that Linda brought up in terms of, how do we address concerns over water use in the construction? I'm not sure how to address that at this time. If anyone has any thoughts on that and wanted to chime in, I would like to get through most of this document today, so we can certainly come back to that. But are there any other thoughts on water use for construction?
Melissa, I have a quick technical issue here. I have a lovely large picture of you, which takes up half the screen.
Oh.
The other half of the screen is not large enough for me to be able to read what you're presenting.
Okay.
I don't know if you can change that on your end, and maybe I'm not smart enough to change it on my end. Thanks.
Let me turn off the camera, see if that helps.
Sad,
Just
there's
for
a
point of reference, it looks good to me.
And sad on your computer, you should be able to put your cursor in the middle and a line would come up and you can drag the cameras off to the right and increase the size of her screen, the document.
Right, and there's also another way. In the top right corner, you have an option to have either speaker view or gallery view. And that can make a difference as well. If you have speaker view on, you might be seeing just Melissa.
Thank you very much. The first suggestion worked great.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thanks to everyone for chiming in on the technology. That's always helpful. Okay. So back to the question on water, and it may be a topic that we come to again. I was not sure how to address that at this point, but let's come back and we will look at that as we go through this effort. I wanted to focus on, so this section here, 1.1.c are the preferred location criteria for these types of facilities. So and I think I've mentioned this before, this format follows formats used in our zoning ordinance today for wireless communication facilities, but it's also a format used from what I've seen in many places around the country that have developed these types of ordinances. These preferred and disfavor criteria are meant to help the decision makers, our Planning and Zoning Commission, or if a case is appealed, the Board of Supervisors, evaluate where these projects are located and to raise different issues that are very succinctly noted in our comprehensive plan so that we don't lose sight of what those values are. This is an attempt to bring those into the code. What it's not intended to do is to be all exclusive. In other words, if a facility, and probably none of these facilities will all be able to meet preferred criteria. It's going to be a mix of preferred and disfavored. But there is a statement in here, and this is what I wanted to focus on right here. It's this last sentence. The existence of preferred and disfavored criteria at a single potential facility site are not mutually exclusive. in instances where co-occurrences exist, the county, there was a question, what is the finder? Well, it's the county, shall review the application narrative and weigh the presence of favored and disfavored elements to determine overall compliance with objectives. This is the opportunity to look at each project individually, and we did have some help from our county attorney's office in putting the sentence together, because we wanted to make it clear, and maybe it isn't clear yet, that it's not mutually exclusive. Like I said, that most projects are going to have elements of both favored and disfavored. So that was a question that came up as far as who's a finder of fact. Well, it's the county. It would be the Planning and Zoning Commission for the majority of these projects, because they're all conditional use permits. And unless the case is appealed, that is the final decision body. So again, talking about view sheds, and disfavored facilities, there are statements in here for all facilities, and this is again something for the county decision makers to think about. What are the view impacts? Basically, what are they? Are they going to impact the different parks? Are they going to impact our scenic corridors? Well, yes, they most likely will. It doesn't mean that it's not going to allow the project to move forward. So I just wanted to, pause here for a minute, because this is one of the bigger topics of conversation, as Billy has brought up, and it is a balancing act in terms of getting the energy systems. We know we need these renewable systems to be built in the county, and we realize there will be impacts. I think the other thing that maybe is helpful is to understand there is a lifetime or a lifespan with these projects. From my understanding is they're not going to necessarily be in place for forever, because they will come to the end of their useful life and be possibly removed, or different technology will replace them. So I'll stop talking here. I did want to open this up for this particular concern.
Well, Melissa, that is my primary concern, and I thank Diana and Bill Cardesco for their comments, but we really didn't get to a comparison of impact on the land. And maybe it's a bigger conversation than we can have here. In my Pollyanna world, we go out onto a landscape and we cover it with solar panels. We don't scrape and cover with gravel. We use a flat area. We put in concrete posts. We put up the panels and let the grass underneath do what it will do. It will change, certainly, but some animals will survive and some plants will survive. I believe there's precedence for this, and Bill Auberly knows a whole lot more about this than I do, as compared to many, 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 many miles of roads, and a different impact on the viewshed. And I'm humbled by my company here. I'm not an expert on this, and I don't have the experience that a lot of people have, but just from a simple common sense point of view, that's the question that I'm asking.
I want to make sure, can everybody see my screen? Are you all looking at the draft ordinance?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. So let me just, reiterate your question then. Are you thinking about the difference in visible impacts or scenic impacts of wind versus solar? Is that your thought?
Yes, and compare the overall conservation value impact of the two.
So,
and of course, that we also have to compare the dollars and cents of the two, because nobody's going to step forward with something that costs more money than something else. But are we to a place? Well, we're in a place where we can compare those, and we can favor one over the other if we care to, and that helps. For instance, when we say sacred landscapes, that really caught my attention. Not because I don't appreciate the concept and the importance to some groups in our community, but it's so amorphous it's such a moving target. And I can't imagine an applicant coming forward with a plan where sacred landscapes was out there but not defined. That could just lead to lots of time and wasted energy and money. So if we get something below the sacred landscape, like solar, that helps to solve that problem. And so I'm kind of pushing on that, but I think that's an important thing to be talking about.
So in the interest of this topic, because we may want to just go ahead and jump into it right now. I have not seen examples of where an ordinance can favor wind over solar or solar over wind, but I would want any of our technical experts to jump in here, because I would put out there from the county's perspective that if we try to quantify which would be more energy productive or more viable, then that would actually probably slow our process down quite a bit. But I am not the expert on that. So if any, hi, who's that?
It's Karen. Do you want me to make a quick comment?
That'd be great, Karen.
I think you guys have done an excellent job of trying to govern the kinds of technologies that might be brought forward within the values and other design criteria that have been long established at the county. And I think that if you continue to do so, you'll be able to get to a fair way of evaluating what Sat is talking about. And I do not think from a technical or economic perspective right now, or even in the next decade, that there will be any reason to say that utility scale wind turbine technology or utility scale solar photovoltaic technology, that one should be favored over the other. You have mentioned other things in here, such as the resource concerns of concentrating solar power that uses water or biomass that uses water, and you're using the water use as the consideration. So I think you want to continue with that. But from a technical and economic perspective right now, I don't see that there's a strong argument to favor or disfavor solar photovoltaic over wind on the energy side. I think you're doing a great job of sticking to what values or resource or environmental or cultural considerations do we want to put in place, and we want to apply those considerations to everything fairly and equally.
Thanks, Karen. Sat, does that help to maybe give us a better understanding of what we're faced with in terms of, solar and wind projects? We'll be looking at both, and possibly biomass, and needing to evaluate them all.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to cherry pick one over the other, but I'd definitely like to start a process of communication. And one of the issues, I think, is if we are going to consider view sheds, I think one of my suggestions was that I think it was the BLM just went over the BLM land and picked favored sites for renewable energy some years ago, and that seemed to work. We could probably talk to Bill Auberly about that. But if we're going to limit wind sites based on view sheds, then I think in the interest of efficiency for applicants coming in, we need to tighten up what we're talking about. I agree with view sheds from 18064 and 89A. As I said, the sacred view sheds are a wild card there that I think we need to define, and there may be others. Thanks.
Well, I think this is Billy Cardasco. This view shed issue is really the only issue that I feel like most of us want, that everyone wants to talk about. We go around trying to figure out how to offset that with all these conservation practices and thoughts and so on and so forth. But really, it comes down to view shed. And I almost wonder if we shouldn't just have a conversation just specifically about that. you know, what Sat just said about not having it anywhere near the Highway 89 and 180 and 64. The land that we're talking about in Coconino County, the only land in Coconino County that has the opportunity for any of this renewable energy is between those highways. So there you go.
Right.
So
And-
I mean, when you say that's the deal, you know, I know we talk about Coconino County being the second largest county in the United States. The fact is you got 5 landowners in between those highways that you're talking about. And so that view shed really is the deal. Babbitt's, I'll tell every one of you, we can offset anything on this ranch with the conservation values that we have in place and the practices and the management. We're doing more things than is even suggested in this document. And so it really does come down to view shed, Melissa, and anyway, and maybe that's just really the first conversation to have, because the rest of this document would flow from that discussion.
This is Carl. I'd like to make a comment about this in terms of another tool in your box. I proposed long ago, and I still feel it's a great idea, that we get permission from the state and initiate an open space special district that could be subscribed to by any citizen in the county, or for that matter, any citizen anywhere, that would help fund a source of money for conservation easements and to protect the view sheds. So the ranchers would have some options, and I support renewable energy projects, but they would also have options to sign on to participation in a renewable open space special district that would pay them in return for development rights or to establish conservation easements. So I think the county has available to it other strategies that also help the ranchers and other landowners to have a broader array and to assure the rest of us that these valued view sheds, in fact, will be protected.
Thanks, Carl. And you do raise another point, and because there is another implementation item in the comprehensive plan to create a transfer of development rights ordinance. That's not the focus of what we're doing here, but from what I'm hearing you suggest is something to remind people about, that there are other tools like a TDR ordinance or this concept of an open space special district that may provide revenue for the ranchers and provide options for the ranchers. And I think that is a very good point to keep in mind. With that, we do, that's a next project. So we'll continue to work through this ordinance. Just want to speak a little bit more on the view sheds. I think that, and the planning commissioners who are involved in this process, it will ultimately fall to them as the initial decision makers on these projects to weigh the values. I think that, one of the things to recognize is that most, if not all, of these projects are going to be visible from somewhere from a scenic point of view. This county is known for its scenic beauty, that you just can't get away from that. And so it is a value. And it is a judgment here. And the intent of this part of the ordinance is to bring that up so it is considered for each individual project. There may not be there are not going to be ways to mitigate an 800-foot tall wind turbine unless we look at color and different things like that. But that's where the tools come in terms of our application requirements for things like visual simulation, so that the impact is understood.
Melissa, if I may help out here a little bit. One of the things that we were accused of in Perrin Ranch was being NIMBYs. We didn't want it in our backyard. And I will come back and say to you honestly, I felt it was going to affect the view shed to have the 400-foot towers. And you can see them from a long way off. But it's not really, in my eyesight, it's not really that disruptive to the general overall picture. Now, I haven't seen any 800-foot ones yet, at least not close enough. But I think between the value of producing energy that's usable and the value of the viewscapes, that they're not mutually exclusive. However, that said, you can't let them go like they did the ones in California, where it looks like a mess of metal tossed all over the ground. If it's only going to be there for 20 years, that's not very long in a lifetime.
Right.
And for the amount of materials that are being used, that is a far greater issue than a viewscape should be. And so I'm going to say that the viewscape is important, and especially the night sky, not to have red lights on, because you can see them a long way off. I mean, from the North Rim.
Right.
You can see them. But I think that we need to look at all of the picture and not just say the viewscapes, but the use of resources, the amount of energy being produced for those resources, and the viability of the plant. If that plant was going to be up there for 50 years, maybe there'd be some justification. But for 20 years, to put all that time and money and energy into something that's going to have a limited lifetime like that is not really worth it.
Thanks, Linda. So I want to get back to the ordinance then. You know, there are these criteria in here in terms of visibility, and we've had multiple comments, you know, about this. From a planning perspective, it seems useful for me as a planner to have this in here as a consideration, so that when a staff report goes to the Planning Commission, this has been analyzed. Again, it's not mutually exclusive because there are these preferred criteria. And I think that these are pretty well vetted out at this point with some modifications. But in terms of disfavor, is there a sense from our energy developers that are on this call and everybody else that this is something that should not be in the ordinance, or should we leave it in the ordinance? I'm just going to be real blunt about that. This, because these are direct values from our comprehensive plan. This is not something that we're just pulling out of the air.
Melissa, this is Sod. I wonder, I think Bill suggested maybe we have a separate meeting about this, and I might support that. We've got a lot to cover here and not too much more time.
We have to cover, and you know, yeah, okay, well that's.
I was involved in approving 2 of these on planning and zoning, and I think we got it more or less right, honestly.
You got it. You said you got it right. Is that what you said?
I think so. From a viewshed point of view, I mean, we certainly took that into account. We worked very hard to work it out, and I think it came out okay. But that was the elephant in the room, and I think it still is. You know, we might decide that more or less, as Bill said, there are other considerations more important than viewsheds, like producing renewable energy. Maybe that's just a bitter pill we have to swallow, because we have to be successful in going to renewable energy. Maybe we find a way to pre-approve sites. I don't know, but it's a big conversation that could eat the rest of this hour.
Right, I agree. So that's a good suggestion. And what I'll do is I'll put it back out there to everybody and ask for some volunteers for a subgroup. And we can talk about the visible impacts a little bit more, or a lot more. So one of the other big themes, and again, some of these edits, these are minor edits that I will send back to you all for additional comments, but the idea of setbacks for the wind turbines goes hand in hand with this idea of how do we deal with these participating versus non-participating properties. And you know, this is something that we've been actually talking about with ever since the technical group was convened. And I would also suggest that this might be a separate discussion, because as the code was drafted, as we were drafting the code, we looked at some pretty large setbacks. So in other words, there are setbacks from different residential zones and, as well as open space and then unzoned land. And we took a very conservative point of view where it would be a setback for a wind turbine would be 1/2 mile from those property lines. And what I'm hearing from different sources that those are probably too great, but we're not going to probably solve that today. But I do think it's a big topic, a big theme that's come out of this. And again, I would suggest that we do a sidebar conversation. And to me, what goes along with this are these idea of non-participating properties or participating properties, because I know that the industry has experience with this, and there are different ways of I guess bringing in property owners who are not actually don't have impacts of the project, but they participate in it. And I'll defer to anyone who wants to jump in, Terrence or anyone else, because this is something that I think goes hand in hand with the setbacks and really understanding what's going to happen on the land. There are some setbacks in much smaller jurisdictions that don't have as much land as a county have. And for instance, one of the smallest setbacks that we've seen are wind turbines are displaced 110% of the height from a property line, which in our situation may not actually be appropriate because we have such much larger landscapes. Would anyone want to chime in on that?
Yeah, this is Ruben. That could be a pretty big concern for us because of the checkerboard situation in Coconino County. 1/2 mile takes out half the section. And if it's, if it's truly checkerboard, then there's zero development if it's 1/2 mile, since the sections are a mile. So 1/2 mile on private land on both sides deems that, that state land parcel undevelopable based on setbacks.
Right.
So
Okay.
It's critical, for us in the land department because of the checkerboard situation. Maybe not so much with participating, projects, but certainly, non-participating. So we would much like to discuss that further as well.
Okay, Ruben, thank you for that. And this is a complicated issue, and I think that it will require some additional study, but I am looking at the clock, and I had not expected that we would get through this entire draft today, because we did dedicate some time, to our bigger picture work. But I did want to touch on this other big topic here, and we've had a lot of comments on what are preliminary site investigations. And comments from our development community that this is too much information to bring it at a pre-application stage. And I wanted to clarify that the intent with these, and I don't know if this language is actually sufficient, but these were intended to be what I've heard termed as desktop investigations or evaluations. So for instance, my understanding is that the different agencies, Game and Fish, probably Fish and Wildlife, I imagine BLM, Forest Service, they have some resource databases that would help a developer to initially explore some of these sensitive features on the land, and would be able to then come to the county and say, well, we've initially looked at these areas, these don't seem to impact it, or these areas are impacted more than others. So the intent was that these would not be full on, for instance, class 3 cultural resource studies, but these would be preliminary that then may require additional on the ground surveys. So that was another big theme that has come up in these comments. Did anyone want to chime in on that? Because I'm going to scroll through this. Hi, who's that?
Melissa, I need to back up for a second. You went a little too fast for me.
Sorry,
just a real quick comment on the disfavored locations for biomass facilities, where you called out the lighting
Right
ordinance zones 1 and 2. Eventually, the lighting ordinance will probably eliminate zone 3, and this wording would eliminate consideration in any part of the county the way it is worded, if that is changed.
Okay. That's a good point, John. And we can certainly come back and amend this. If this gets approved before the lighting ordinance does, then after the lighting ordinance is approved, we would have to come back and fix this. That's a really good point.
And why have to do that when you can fix it right up front right now?
We'll have to talk more. I'm not sure how we would fix that.
Well, I may be able to offer a suggestion or two, but
all right, I'll make
go ahead and move on. There's so much more.
Right. Well, we'll have to follow up with you on that.
Melissa, this is Sat. If I'm looking at this entire document and thinking urgency, my greatest urgency is supporting biomass, because at this point we don't have a plan B to move forward with fry without biomass. That's my impression anyway.
Right.
So this feedstock issue with 150 miles, I support that, and I'd want Jay to chime in if he cares to, but you know, pretty smoky driving from Flagstaff to Santa Fe. And we're next.
You know, one real fast comment relative to biomass, if that affects the observatories, and the Naval Observatory is one of the reasons for this is the infrared signature that can occur as a result of it. That can affect radio telescopic observation. So,
right.
Just being said, that's one of the reasons why it's a special consideration, especially relative to the Naval Observatory. And I understand the wording that is in there and why, and that is one of the reasons why. So, but we don't want to do something that would pose a problem and eliminate it, and then have to go back and change the code.
And we have had Naval Observatory comment on, for instance, this section right here. Any site that would negatively impact or impair military operations.
Yeah,
so,
and I think
yeah.
at the Planning and Zoning Commission that I think we have sufficient expertise that would recognize this and address it.
Thank you.
I'll just speak up since the Naval Observatory was mentioned. I do appreciate that sentiment, and notice that there were a few comments on that one statement, and just wanted to, for folks' awareness, this language kind of follows a standard request that we make when we get involved in these sorts of ordinance updates, and it was adapted slightly for the considerations of the Naval Observatory.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that, having pushed this for exactly that reason. So thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So it's after 10:30 now, and I think that what I would recommend we do at this point is I can send out a note with this draft in it. Everyone can look at it in relation to your comments, but I've already heard about a couple of spin-off conversations that need to happen in regard to the view sheds, but also in regard to the setbacks. And then I would offer a follow-up meeting, of course, so we can continue to work on this. How does that sound for everybody who's still on the call?
Sounds fine.
That's good by me, Melissa. I've got a few other refinements I'd like to offer for you, so that'll allow me to get those in. Thank you.
Okay. And I will reopen the site. For those of you that were trying to make comments, I had closed it just so I could condense all the comments, but I will reopen it after I post this version up there. So is that helpful for everybody to be able to comment that way on that public site?
I think it's great.
Okay, it's really helpful for
very
us.
helpful, yeah.
Okay. All right, well, everyone, it seems like Friday mornings work. I'm thinking maybe we'll check calendars in a couple weeks. Will that work for everybody to digest this draft? And I'll organize some separate meetings, and then we'll continue to move forward on this. Are there any questions or comments? We do have some meetings scheduled with to visit ranches. Actually, I was going to show you that really quick. Let me just show you that. And then I'll do this. Right, so here, back to our schedule. You know, we began this with you in September. We have some sidebar meetings and ranch visits scheduled through October and November. So we'll use the rest of this month in November to continue this work with all of you. And then at some point in the fall, winter, we're looking at maybe bringing this forward to study session, work sessions with the commission and the board. And then at some point after that, start the public open house process. So because, you know, we'll have an open house and try to do some wide outreach on that prior to adoption. So with that, any overall comments or questions? And again, I didn't anticipate we would get through the entire document today, but we will work through it. So thanks again, everybody, so much for your time.
Thank you for your work on this, Melissa.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
You're welcome.
Thanks,
Thank
Melissa.
you.
Yeah, you know, I think this is actually more efficient than when we used to meet in person. I hate to say it.
Okay.
Maybe not as much fun, but
As a person who enjoys a good debate, I'll have to disagree with Commissioner Best on that one a little bit. But no, this works and it's been working extremely well. I've gotten used to it, much as I like the interpersonal part.
I agree. It's different, but it is efficient. So I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. You guys take care.
Thank you, Melissa. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Fantastic job, Melissa. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Okay, I'm